Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how top experts sell their ideas, their value, and their services. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want better clients, bigger deals, and higher fees. Today, you are in for a real treat. I have the one, the only Stuart Maister from Strategic Narrative. That's strategic-narrative.com. Stuart, welcome to the show.
David, it's a pleasure.
So we are talking about storytelling in business and how storytelling can also be one of the key tools to build trust with your audience, with your prospects, with your clients. Both incredibly important topics. Let's start out, Stuart. Tell me a little bit about your professional journey that brought you to the work that you're doing today, and what were some interesting pit stops along the way?
So I started out life as a national television and radio reporter here in the UK for the BBC and also for ITN, which people outside the UK may not know, but it's kind of, well, at that point was the only alternative to the BBC. It was the commercial independent news organization, independent television news. And I also then worked for Sky News, which was owned by Rupert Murdoch. So I also worked in Australia, actually, as a national TV producer. The point is, I started life as a broadcast journalist. And fundamentally, David, actually, I would say that my entire life has been spent doing journalism, doing broadcast journalism in one form or another. And the reason for that is the fundamental skill of a broadcast journalist is to turn up to something, be faced by a lot of complexity, maybe a 2-hour press conference or a complex story, and translate that into a few key facts that you can convert into a 40-second report or a 1-minute report on television. That's all you got. So you've got to get to the heart of things pretty quickly. And I took that skill and decided to make more money. So I started a business which was a PR business, getting companies on television news. I knew how to do this. I knew lots of people in TV. I knew what TV news was looking for. So I had a very successful business in the UK called the London Bureau, which helped a lot of very large companies, won a lot of awards in achieving TV coverage. Got bought by an American business, a NASDAQ-listed business, which was doing something similar in the States, using things called video news releases. Anyone listening in the world of PR from that era will know what they are, but they are what they sound like. You send out chunks of video to TV stations and get them to use it. But my approach was much more consultative. It was much more focused on the story that we were telling, and then the video became a tool of that. And that's a critical point, because all the work I've done since then in a range of other businesses has been about fundamentally how you get to the heart of the story that you're trying to tell, and then what are the tools you need in order to tell that story effectively.
Totally fantastic. And I want to dig into the power of storytelling in business, but first let's go out, global, galactic view. Why is storytelling so vitally important?
If you've read a book called Sapiens, which I would recommend to everyone, by a guy called Yuval Harari, it's a wonderful book. It's about the history of humankind from the beginning. And the fundamental idea that he says is the only thing that separated humans, Homo sapiens, from chimpanzees, we had exactly the same appetites, if you'd gone back a few tens of thousands of years, a group of Homo sapiens looked like a group of chimpanzees doing much the same stuff. The thing that separated us was storytelling. We developed this idea of telling a story. And what that meant was we could describe the past, the future, some potential future that hadn't yet happened. We could describe something that we hadn't yet created and what it might be. We could share, we could build communities, we could collaborate, and then we could fight other people. Our story is better than your story. All the things that we've done as humans since then, everything, he says, since then, has been based on the power of storytelling. And that's true, not just for us as a race. It's not just true for us as a nation, but it's true for us as a business, as a firm, or as an individual. Because the only thing you've got really as a firm is your story. And everything else, your factories, your people, your staff, your products, your services, are manifestations of that story. So you better get that story right.
And I would love you to break down a little bit, because I'm sure, in a large firm, of course, there's all kinds of different leadership stories, marketing stories, sales stories, culture stories, employee stories. The most powerful stories, even for a consultant or a trainer or a speaker or a business coach, it's going to be client stories, I imagine. And it's going to be the story of why you started the business that you started. So talk a little bit about sort of the origin story and what things we should think about there. And then I would love to talk about stories in a sales context as well.
So I think you've got to the heart of things, as I would expect, David, very quickly, which is this. This is the difference between the strategic narrative and, as it were, just storytelling. Because what every organization needs is one strategic narrative, but many, many stories. And you see the difference. So we're talking about the core story, the core narrative of the organization, or as I say, if you're an individual, your core narrative as an individual, if you're a solopreneur or whatever, or even in your life, actually, this goes beyond business. So we're talking business here. Because if you've got that core story, right, manifesting your values, your vision, your mission, your purpose, the value you're bringing to the world, then all the stories that you tell need to be evidence of that story. You shouldn't just be randomly telling lots of different stories. Let's say you're a big company. You look on a lot of big company sites and they have case studies. And it's just a lot of random list of case studies. Now, they may be divided into sectors. They may be subdivided a little bit. There's no golden thread running through them that says these stories could only have come from this organization because this is the core narrative of this organization. And they're not told in a way that is consistent to some core narrative, and they should be. And when they are, people have a strong sense of what is special, different, great, distinctive about this service, this product, this organization that I'm doing business with.
Yes, I know. Terrific episode here, but have you seen our latest web training? Oh my goodness, pop over there right now, or as soon as you're done listening to this episode, it's doitmarketing.com/webinar. See you over there. Back to the good stuff. When you work with clients, when you work with the folks that hire you either for keynote speaking or coaching or consulting, how do you boil down that core strategic narrative that all of these different stories are connected to?
The key is simplicity. It's like I said at the beginning that my core skill still is as a journalist, trying to get to simplicity from complexity. And so I ask that the structure is really straightforward. It's asking 4 really, really simple questions. But as you know, because I know your stuff well, that the power is in simplicity. And simple questions are often the most difficult. So the questions are these. It starts with them, not you. Them being the people you're serving, not you, the servant, as it were. The first question is, who is it? Who are they? Who are, specifically, precisely, who are those? They're not all businesses. I work with a lot of professional firms, professional service firms. It's, all businesses of a certain size. No, I mean, okay, specifically, who in those businesses? What type of businesses are you great at? If I were to pick your best, your sweetest spot, the people you love working with, you make the most money from, that get the most value from you, who would they be? Let's really, really sharpen that spear that we're throwing. And then when we've really thought about that, then we ask the big question of why. And there are 2 dimensions to why. The first is their why. What do they care about? What matters to them? Because as you know, as everyone knows when they really think about it, any story you're going to tell to the marketplace has to be all about the why of the who. It's about what they care about and who the hell they are. And then you're working backwards to you, not the other way around. But the second why, and there is an important why, everyone's familiar with Simon Sinek's work. He says the power of why. He means your purpose, the why. So if we get into the heart of a strategic narrative, it is really important that we connect with the purpose of your organization. If it's a small business or you're going to base it on the founder's story, which can be a very powerful thing, what was the motivation of doing that? What was the greatness, the superpower that became the why of this organization? And the real magic is trying to connect those two whys. It's really kind of the wiring between their why and your why. We're now getting to the heart of a strategic narrative. Because also in that why is going to be stuff about vision and values. And that's where we go from the why to the how. I've never worked with an organization, I think, where the how hasn't been the point of difference. It's never what we do. It's how we do it. Always, always, always how we do it that makes a difference. So if you compare 5 law firms, if you ask what do they do, on paper, they do the same thing for the same group of people. How they do it, if you really work hard to discover what makes them different in the way they do it, it'll be about their values, about their culture, about the way they approach their clients. There'll be a bunch of things that one can find out that can really describe their how. And that's, again, a core part of the story. And finally, and often least interestingly, is what you do. Of course, it's important to be able to describe that accurately and well, because that's fundamentally what you're going to charge for. But nevertheless, the flow is in that order.
Yes. This is reminding me, and here in the US, I don't want to get into Republican versus Democrat, but Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, famous as quote unquote great communicators. And somebody once broke this down. If you look at either one of their major speeches, it's always 3 pillars. Pillar number 1, who we are. So it's an identity, right? As Americans, we're coming from here. As British citizens, we're coming from there. As a people, we are. So it's who we are. Number 2 is where we are, a picture of the current situation. What needs to be fixed? What needs to be improved? Why this piece of legislation is important. And then the third part of the story is where we are going, where we're going together. And they would enroll you in that journey, and they would enroll you in the vision of that future. So talk a little bit. I mean, is that resonating at all with kind of what makes sense of it? Part 1, who we are. Part 2, where we are. Part 3, where we are going.
Well, I'd say 2 things about that. The firstly, it's really interesting you've looked at politics, because political advisors talk a lot about narrative, building a narrative. What is our narrative? What do we stand for? Well, you can talk about the detail of what we might do, but there needs to be an overall narrative, a big picture in politics. And what you're really connecting with, David, in my view, is not so much external selling narrative, but internal leadership narrative, which is equivalent, if you like, to being the leader of a nation, where it's an internal story rather than an external story. And particularly in America, and we've become better at this in the UK and other countries too, the internal story about us, and any external story is how we are going to project this into the world. So you're absolutely right. And there is a slight difference when we really focus on looking at a leadership narrative rather than an external strategic narrative. And that's where I would make the connection with what you're saying, because it's critical, of course, in an organization where there are people there are more than just the person on their own. And it's a particularly large organization. I tend to work with large organizations where there needs to be this core focus, this story, not just a vision, but what does this vision mean actually in practice? What does that change about the way I do my job? That's the key question. Great to have a tagline, but what does that change about what you want me to do tomorrow? And if you can make that connection, that's where the rubber hits the road.
Totally. Well, I'm imagining that, there's all kinds of storytelling philosophies out there. And I want to also draw a big distinction between how to craft a compelling story, which is sort of an externally focused thing, versus the way that you teach it and the whole strategic narrative methodology, which is the thinking behind constructing these stories leads to a whole new level of clarity. Talk about the clarity that we need to have around our strategic narratives so that we can craft these compelling stories.
Clarity is the outcome of this work. If you ask me, what is the outcome of this work? When I'm coaching individuals, for example, we talk about this stuff about building your story. What is the story we're trying to build? And then you're looking at day-to-day issues or weekly challenges and saying, how does this track back to this big story we're trying to build, right? But the clarity, it's almost the key that unlocks everything, because I now know the answer because I have clarity on this direction, this story I'm trying to tell. So you're quite right. There are many, many different versions of storytelling techniques. And a lot of them are embedded in the novel, the 7 stages of a novel. There are lots of different books on how to write your story like a novel. I come from a very different discipline, which is journalism, which is get to the point quickly, grab someone's attention, and then bring them in. Okay. If you're writing a news piece, and this is the formula for the storytelling that I teach, is think of it like a news piece. I love quoting, actually, I'm a broadcaster, so I love quoting a tabloid newspaper. We have one over here called The Sun, which is, I think, internationally known. And I always say, if you're the Sun editor, right, the Sun editor, and people talk about the speed of change. We all face change. If you're the editor of The Sun, you don't know what your product is tomorrow morning. You don't know what the contents of your product is tomorrow morning. You don't know. Now we're in a 24-hour news cycle. You don't know what your product will be in 5 hours' time. You don't know. You may have some ideas or stuff's floating around, but you don't know for sure, right? You're making it up all the time. It's constantly changing. But you do know for sure how it's going to be packaged. You know for certain a Sun reader knows exactly what to expect, whatever the contents, okay? And they're packaged in a way for the Sun reader, not for the reader of the broadsheets, right? Who want something different. So they know their audience. So what does a Sun reader get? And I think this is a brilliant formula for storytelling. They get a big, bold headline. So the number one challenge in the narrative is, can we turn this into a headline, a phrase, a simple, short phrase that feels like you go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Okay. The rest of the front page of the Sun has 100 words, 3 or 4 paragraphs. And in those paragraphs, they tell you the entire story. They could tell you the story of the end of the world in that 3 or 4 paragraphs they had to, and they could easily, right? And for most of us, that might be enough. And by the way, a big picture as well, a symbol. That might be enough. I've got that. I've got this. Thank you. But the Sun reader, what they really want the Sun readers to turn to pages 5 and 6, where the real dirt is, the real detail is. That's where the detail is. So I'm reeling you into my story, and I want you to buy the paper because you want to go to pages 5 and 6, where the real salacious stuff is, the great pictures, the real filth, what he said, she said, right? And that detail is often the detail of what we do, the detail of our product, of our service. It's all, but that's pages 5 and 6 stuff. The question is, what's on page 1, right? And the pages 5, the interesting thing is, if you look at the way so many people tell a story, they start with pages 5 and 6. They start with the detail because they know so much. They know so much about their product, their service, the thing they're trying to sell, that they want to tell you everything. But really, what's the headline that's going to make me go, oh, really? Tell me more. Wow, that's interesting. What does that mean? Raises a question. What does that mean? Well, there's 150 words, the elevator pitch, if you like. Wow. Okay, now the right person says, now I'm interested. I want to learn to go to pages 5 and 6. The person is not for says, thank you. I now know I don't need any more information. Great. Not for me. Or, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to add another chocolate cake on top of this beautiful multi-layered chocolate cake that we just constructed. And that is the connection between, because you mentioned the 5 law firms, and the 5 law firms might all look the same, sound the same, except for the story. How does the story help to build trust and the entire value of trust building with an audience, with a group of prospects, people that say, well, this sounds like a good story, and these folks are the ones that I'm going to bet on. These folks are the ones that I'm going to invest with. These folks are the ones I'm going to buy from. Tell us about this story building and trust building connection.
Thank you. Well, let me just share my credentials, talk about trust. So I also am the joint managing director of a company called Mutual Value, which is a training company on how to train people on how to build high trust relationships. And by the way, as an aside, my cousin, a guy called David Maister, was the guy who wrote a book called The Trusted Advisor. He created the phrase, the trusted advisor. And there is, if you Google it, something called the Maister Trust Equation, which is very well known in professional service firms. So I kind of claim credibility by family association. But actually, the truth is that trust is the foundation of any business that you do with anyone. Okay. And whether you're selling, whether you're employing, whether you're working with someone, you think about when there's an absence of trust, what behaviors flow from that. And you realize that you've got an unsustainable business if you're not trusted. You've got unsustainable employee brand, if you like, if you're not trusted. It's the thing that, and when you are very trusted, that's a huge value add. It creates value. It creates stronger relationships, you make more money because fundamentally people aren't querying fees and costs all the time because they trust you. We all know what that's like. We all know, I don't know if you explain more. We all know what that's like in our personal lives or in our professional lives. So you're asking about the connection. So trust needs to be at the centerpiece of a strong strategic narrative. What is it about this that makes these people that we decided we want to do business with trust us? And in mutual value, we've created a trust model. We've defined trust because otherwise it's just a nebulous thing. You can't consciously, with intention, create trust unless you know what it is. And we've defined it so that you know what it is. And it has three components. We call it the 3 C's. The first, which is where the strategic narrative is so important, is clarity. The strategic narrative is the clarity dimension of our trust model. In other words, I'm really, really clear on who I am, what value I bring. And if I'm going to build trust with you, David, what I then really want to do is bring my story to the table, but I want to co-create with you a really clear ambition together of what we want to do together. I'm bringing my stuff to the party. Even if you're the buyer, you got the cash, but you've got to do stuff as well, usually, for us to create value together. You've got to bring more than just money. You've got to bring if we're going to build a trusted relationship, then we need to build a relationship and be clear what we're trying to do together. That's clarity. The second component is character, the second C. So character is about how we behave. And again, I mentioned earlier, your values are an important part of your narrative. So I might come to you with a really strong sense of my character as an organization or as an individual. I can define for you the values, the behaviors you should expect from me, and I should do, because that's part of my pitch. In fact, it's the main reason you'll buy me is the behaviors more than the product in most cases, right? But in a great trusted relationship, I'm explicit about this and say, you know what, let's discuss how we're going to behave together to create this value. Because there's certain things that if we're going to work as partners in this enterprise, I expect of you too, right? We're peer-to-peer here. This is a relationship of peers, not master-servant. And the third C is capability. So of course, I need to have capability to sell products and services. Of course I do, but that just gets me in the room. What capability can we create together? If I'm bringing my stuff to the table, what capabilities do you need for this to work? Let me give you a great example of what I mean. I've worked with tech companies. They've got great tech, right? They've got great tech. They've got great people. And they go in and they do great digital transformation and it flops. It fails. Millions are wasted. Why? Often, truthfully, because the client side were useless at the change management process. And as a result, no one adopted it. As a result, it didn't work. Money was wasted. So the capabilities are joint capabilities for that to be successful. And where you've got big bucks involved, it's worth investing the time to build. Now we're talking about a strategic narrative of our relationship, how we're going to work together. And that's incredibly powerful together, right? And in terms of selling, not just selling, but building high-value commercial relationships, this stuff really works.
And it sounds like this part of the sales conversation would be setting out the guidelines for that successful relationship, mutual expectations. Here's what our team is going to do. Here's what we would like your team to do, and sort of shared ownership of the outcome of this consulting project or this change management project. And so many times consulting projects go off the rails because of quote unquote miscommunicated expectations, right? Either the consultant wasn't completely open and didn't share what those expectations are, or the client heard them but did not respect them and did not live by them, did not follow through on what they promised that they would do. So it's a violation of trust and it screws up the value.
I'm nodding vigorously, as you can see, David.
Right.
Because you got it. That's where the clarity piece is so important. I always talk about, this is the bit we've added to all the trust thinking in the past. If you look at all the trust models, including my cousins, it's all about behaviors. It's about the way you are. But no one talks about clarity. And we talk about clarity as being the number one, exactly as you've said. And here's one. Have you ever done a piece of work for someone and it was brilliant? You did a great piece of work, and yet they're disappointed or they're unhappy for some reason. And they've lost a bit of trust, right? Have you got a decorator to do something and they think they've done a great job? And the reason is you hadn't agreed in advance something critical, exactly what you're going to do. Maybe you didn't do exactly what they expected to. Maybe you charge more than they expected without communicating it. There wasn't clarity about fee basis. Maybe you did less than they expected. You did a brilliant piece of work, but they also expected this other thing you didn't do. You didn't know yet. If from your point of view, I didn't know that because we didn't get clarity. We didn't get clear. It wasn't absolutely ruthlessly clear from the beginning. So we had aligned ambitions, aligned expectations, and that destroys trust and destroys reputation. And you don't sell any more to that person. And guess what people do when they don't trust you? They tell their friends.
Hang on. Let's back up the truck. Beep, 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 beep. Listen, I have a brand new sales book out there. You got to get your hands on it. It is awesome. It is amazing. It is fantastic. It is useful, practical, actionable, and a ton of bonuses are waiting for you over at doitselling.com. Grab your copy right now and grab all the bonuses, goodies, companion tools, and downloads that go with the book. You'll love it. I guarantee it. So there's positive ripple effects if you get this right, and there's negative ripple effects if you get this wrong. Now, in this trust building part of the conversation, I'm guessing, but I'd love you to kind of take the lead on this. We're telling client stories of huge success. Maybe we're even telling client stories of some miserable failure, but that builds trust because it opens up vulnerability. So you say, well, this doesn't work 1,000% of the time. In fact, let me share a story where this did not work, and here's why. And then that prospect is either going to identify with, they're talking about kind of how we would approach this, or, oh my goodness, we would never approach it that way. We're better, we're faster, we're smarter, we're much more committed. Our team really wants to make this happen. Stuart, you can count on us. When you say jump, we say how high. Are we actually telling stories in all three phases of all three C's?
I think we're always telling stories, David, aren't we? But we're doing it in exactly what you were describing there as human beings, human to human. Like a guy talking to a guy, a person talking to a person. And it's relevant, of course, and so on. And it's open and it's honest. And all of those things are really, really critical. But I come back to something I said earlier. What we should be trying to do in our intention with our storytelling is always track back to our strategic narrative, our big story. So to the point earlier, if one of our behaviors, one of our character traits is honesty and openness, then the stories we tell demonstrate, as you've just explained there very clearly, honesty and openness. Things can go wrong. It doesn't always go right. And when they go wrong, here's how they go wrong. That's a great story to tell. Let me give you an example of where it went wrong. And here's why. And we learned a lesson from that, and our client learned a lesson from that, or whatever. So openness and honesty is demonstrated in that story, right? I'm trying to consistently tell the big story with my individual stories. That's the strategic part of storytelling. But of course, the individual stories are, and they've all got a point. They've got this headline. The headline was, things don't always go right. Do you want to know more? Yes, I do. Well, let me explain. And, do you want to know more? Yes, I do.
Right.
So, the structure always works.
So, I'm thinking about this, Stuart, in connection with the term brand. When companies want to build a brand, or even when consultants and experts like us want to build a brand, and this is not a term that I'm in love with in general, but I'm thinking if we are able to redefine this term brand or branding as a series of trust building interactions and a series of storytelling interactions, isn't that really what a brand is about?
There's the brand story, if you like, and then the brand stories. Yeah. It's interesting you say it, because many years ago, and I've retained this view, I said in the work I was doing, try and explain to me the difference between brand and reputation. You think about that, right? You could come up with something clever. I could come up with some clever thing, but fundamentally, it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. I heard one of your interviewees recently on one of your podcasts say exactly that phrase. And I shouted to myself as I heard it, because it's a phrase I use all the time. What do people say about you when you're not in the room? That's your reputation. It's also your brand, actually. It's what people know about. It's that little bit of brain space people have about you or your firm or your product or your service that represents, we used to say, I think it's less true now, that if you said what car brand was associated with safety, you say that in a room, everyone would say Volvo, because Volvo had established the little bit of brain space was about safety. That was their hook. They hung their everything onto, and they built their reputation on that, and they built their brand on that. So I think what you're saying is right. So reputation is fundamentally about storytelling. Of course it is. It's what stories do you tell? What stories do other people tell about you when you're not there? And that's what you really want to affect.
Yeah. I'm curious, with your clients and audiences, Stuart, what part or what phase of this process do they tend to resist? And what phase of this process do they start to get really excited and start to embrace?
It's a great question. It's a tough one because, of course, the fact they employ you means they're embracing it. However, I actually am quite a challenging person to work with. I'm an ex-journalist. I'm an ex-hack. What that means is I ask tough, direct questions and often not sugarcoated, because I'm trying to get to the heart of a truth direct as quickly as we can. I will shout out the emperor's new clothes all the time to people. And not everyone likes that. Not everyone I'll give you a great example. I did a piece with a very, very large division of an even larger UK PLC, FTSE 100, FTSE 10 actually, one of the top biggest companies in the UK, but it's one of their divisions. And I wasn't commissioned by the CEO. I was commissioned by one of the other people on the strategic leaders. But I was doing an interview with the CEO. And I said to him as a man, I said, so let me just ask you a really simple question. What do you sell? This is the CEO. And actually what they sold, although it's a big division, was quite simple. I could describe it very simply as a product. He said, so that's a really tricky question. I said, is it? He said, yeah, well, I mean, it's complicated. We do a lot of things. He couldn't describe it. I said, okay. And after several minutes, they said, okay, if you send me an invoice, what does it say on the invoice? Let's start there. What does it say on the invoice? Oh, it's a long list of technology around. It was a big tech firm. I said, but fundamentally, what is it trying to do? And we went round and round and round and round, honestly, on this simple question, David, with the CEO of the business. So that when you ask what do people resist sometimes, it's direct questions that they feel they should know the answer to, and they know they should know the answer to, and they're suddenly put on the spot. And it's not comfortable always, bizarrely. Some people love that. Oh my God, how can I not answer this easily? This is such a great piece of work for us to do this. Thank you for helping us. Others go, who is this guy? Why asking me these difficult questions like what we sell? When the lights really go on in the room for me, and I'm sure a lot of consultants will recognize this, is when because I do a lot of one-on-one interviews, perhaps with a leadership team or range of salespeople or different people involved in the business. And then we'll do a workshop and I'll show them the gaps between the answers, this team that work closely together, the different answers I got to the same simple question. And they all imagine, when they say transformation, they all think the same thing. You suddenly discover they'll have a complete view of what this means. They're all pointing in a different direction, selling the same stuff, but talking to each other daily about the stuff. And that's when light bulbs go on all over the place. And they think, wow, we really need to get aligned on this stuff. And you go, yes, you do. That's why I'm here.
I love that. So good. So good. Well, as we're wrapping up, I've got two final questions for you. The final question is, where can people get connected and stay connected to more Stuart Maister brilliance? But before we get there, if folks were to take one overarching concept from our conversation today about the power of storytelling and building a strategic narrative and how that connects with trust in a professional relationship, what would you hope that one overarching concept would be?
Your reality is created by the story you tell. That's it. Everything you do, everything you sell is based on the story that you've decided. If you haven't got a core story, or you've got many, many core stories that different people are telling, then you're pointing in many directions at once.
And then the problem there, based on our conversation, number one, lack of clarity. Number two, lack of trust. Number three, lack of results. That's not where you want to be. You want to have crystal clear clarity, amazing stories, fantastic trust building capability, and that will get you the results and the influence and the sales that you want. So really, really great. Stuart, how can people get connected and stay connected to you? Where can we send them? What can we give them if they'd like to learn more?
So the website that has all of this gold dust, if you like, is strategic-narrative.com. Strategic-narrative.com. And on that site, there is a PDF you can download with some, just taking you through a really simple process to develop your own narrative. There's a lot of other articles and pieces around these subjects we've been discussing today. And of course, if people want to get in touch with me and have a conversation about this, naturally, I'd be delighted to do so.
And contact info on the website or LinkedIn, or what's the best way to reach out to you?
So on LinkedIn, I respond to, so it's on the website, of course, but on LinkedIn, it's me, Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, surname Maister, M for mother, A-I-S-T-E-R. I spelt that a few times, you can hear. And of course, I'd be delighted to respond to questions or thoughts.
Tremendous. So all of those links, by the way, will be directly under this episode in the show notes when you go to thesellingshow.com. Stuart Maister, thank you for being with us. Completely brilliant. I really appreciate you.
David, I am grateful to you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.